So now we're going to move on to the child protection standards and tools. So some people may have heard of the tools or the standards that are followed. They've also been rejigged back in 2016. So I'm just going to go briefly through what they look like just to give everybody an idea. So for one, all these documents can be found online. Google, you literally can Google Ontario Child Protection Standards, they will pop up. PDF, you can keep it on your desktop, so you can know what stage a CAS worker is at, what standard they are on or what they're following, okay? And like it says here, so it's either on the OACAS website or even if you just Google it. So looking at the standards is what helps you determine, which is what helps you guys know how decisions are made. So the standards are the mandatory framework in which that myself as a child protection worker would work from. It clarifies the expectations regarding the minimal level of performance of child welfare workers, supervisors, and CASs. So this document will tell anybody this is the points and steps that we have to work at in child welfare. Okay, the standards are focused on producing positive outcomes, which they are. They are. And when we go through what an investigation would look like and how files are closed or when they're transferred, it'll speak more to this is how they're set up and this is what's supposed to happen. They are consistent with the purpose of Child, Youth, and the Family Services Act. So this is just the table of contents, and it shows you these are the 8 standards that are in the Child Welfare Standard. And again, Google, and it'll be right there. And like I said, it's in PDF. You can download it. Yes?
Is that new?
So the Ontario Child Protection Standards and Tools, they have been around for an extremely long time, but this was updated back in 2016. Yeah. Okay, so this is just the table of contents for what the actual document has in it. Then we go on to the Protection Tools and Tools Manual, which again was revised in 2016. And these are the 4 tools that are listed. These tools are used, they're the standardized tools for every single worker across this province. But the way a worker interprets the tools, that's where you then get the inconsistencies between workers. So if a Black family has had, we'll say 2 openings, so 2 different phone calls at 2 different times, and the first worker, we'll say was African Canadian or was really open to working with families to look at the strengths, you may find that they are able to use these tools and the file is able to be closed. As long as there's truly no child protection concern, like the kids are truly safe. You then may find you have a counterpart worker or a worker of a different race who then uses these same tools, and this family may be painted in a very different light and their file may now be transferred to an ongoing case manager worker. Okay? So although the tools they're the same across the board, the way workers interpret them are very different. It's not meant for that to happen, but just based on everybody's positions in lives, their privileges, or the lack of power that they have, their gender, their race, their socioeconomic standards, the privileges they work with in life or they have, that is what's going to then influence the way they may answer a question, right? So if there was a question on, let's just say, a home being overcrowded, if you ask me if a home's overcrowded just because there's 3 adults and 7 kids and it's a 3-bedroom apartment, I'm going to tell you no. Because what I see is then there's really great supervision in that home. But if you ask someone who's maybe from, I don't know, a Eurocentric background or lives in a North American background, they may say yes. Because in their home, everybody in their home, there was maybe 1 or 2 people to a bedroom and there was only 2 adults. So they're going to see that as overcrowding. So same situation, but 2 different points of view because of 2 different locations in life, and they see it 2 different ways. So we have the Ontario Safety Assessment, we have a risk assessment, we have the strength and needs assessment, and we have a reassessment tool. And I'm going to go through what they all are. So a safety assessment is done within 24 hours of seeing a family, and it's very clear. It is, I'll also be showing this in a later slide. It's a set of questions, you answer them, you have 3 outcomes. Safe with intervention, or not safe. If you're safe, great, child stays at home. Safe with intervention means maybe we had to put in a safety plan, or the grandma needed to come stay for a couple nights, or grandpa needed to come stay, or the kid's gonna go stay with grandma or aunt or uncle, but the kids, and that's how we're gonna create a safety plan to keep a child safe. Now, not safe, guess what that means? Say it loud. Apprehension, that's right, okay? So again, the table of contents in terms of the tools. So it speaks to the safety assessment, the risk assessment. The risk assessment is a tool that's going to help gauge what is the risk of this child being neglected or abused. And it goes into 4 categories based on the number: low, moderate, high, or very high. And if it's at, say, the investigation level, that rating can stay in any of those, say, first 3, so low, moderate, or high. It can never drop down from 1, but it can go up. Does everybody understand that? Yeah. No? So if I rate a family as moderate, but then there's a mitigating factor, I can't drop their risk level to low. I don't have enough time or information about the family to say, yes, they can be low. But if it's at an ongoing point, they can drop it to low because they've had more time to understand and get to know the family, to see that there are all these other safety measures in place and all these strengths in place, that they can then drop the risk level from moderate to low, or from very high to high, or from high to low. Okay, the strength and needs assessment, that is a tool to gauge exactly what it says. What are the top 3 strengths of this family? So how do we capitalize on those? And what are the top 3 needs of this family? And how do we decrease those needs and turn them into strengths? Okay, and then there's a reassessment tool that is used specifically if kids are in care to reassess what is the concern for this child, and can they go home, and what can that look like? Okay, so this is the safety assessment. So this is the first part of it. Again, it's simply yes or no. There's no long drawn out questions. And this is what it looks like. Oh, and this is what part of the risk assessment looks like. So like I said, there's a neglect side and abuse side. Once you tally up the numbers, that's how I get my ratings for abuse or neglect. Does everybody understand that? Okay. So next we're going to move into our eligibility spectrum. So the eligibility spectrum, that is the tool that states what are we going out for? What are child protection workers going out for to go and engage with a family? What is what they, anybody who's heard a child protection worker speak, what's the coding? Has anybody ever heard that before? Yes? So what's the coding that you're going out for? Because your coding determines if you go out within 12 hours, if you go out within 7 days, or if you go out within 48. Okay, but 48 is for institutionals, so teachers and daycares. 12 hours is for things that are seen as being quite severe, so a child who currently has an injury on them and stated it's being done by a primary caregiver, a child who's been abandoned by their primary caregiver, a child who's at risk of being harmed because of their primary caregiver's possibly a mental health break or a substance abuse issue, or a domestic violence issue where neither parent is now around to take care of the child. So our eligibility spectrum. Again, you can Google eligibility spectrum, it'll come up and you'll see the entire document. It is loaded on the internet as a PDF. You can always download it to your desktops so that you have these tools when you're working with a family. Because something most people in community-based agencies are going to ask is, so why is child welfare involved with your family? I don't know. And that's an answer from a lot of people. I don't know why they're involved with us. Okay, well, give me the story as to what happened. What did they tell you? And that's when you kind of start to pick apart why child welfare may be involved with the family. But it's not until you've gotten that consent form signed and you speak to the child welfare worker that you have the understanding of why the child welfare is involved, which is mandated through this eligibility spectrum. Okay? So eligibility spectrum, it's designed to assist child welfare in how we do our work, and it helps in the decision-making process of why we're going out. It's consistent and accurate decision about the eligibility for service. So there's 3 levels of service. There's severe, there is moderate, not severe, and then there is below the line. There's no real line, but it's just like, if these are the type of concerns, then we don't get involved, because there's really no protection. There's no protection issue to the child. It aids in determining the legal requirements for the initial and ongoing investigations for a child and the intervention levels, and it denotes the reasons for service based on legislation. So there's 3 parts to it. So there's matching a situation to a section, determining the scale, and then identifying the level of severity. So this is what it looks like, okay? So it might be kind of hard to, actually it's pretty clear to read. So one of the most common calls when it comes to, say, the African Canadian community is, if you call home and tell my mommy, she's gonna beat me. Or, Well, because you called home yesterday, my mommy beat me with a belt. Okay? So now, those two things fall in the exact same thing, which I'm going to point out. So they fall here under section 1, okay? And because the child said, if you call home and tell mommy, she's going to beat me, it's physical force, but it falls here under moderate because there's a risk that the child may be harmed. They haven't been harmed, okay? But if it's, well, because you called home yesterday, my mommy beat me with a belt. That's our extreme severity because the child's telling you they are currently injured due to their parent doing something to them. And in some situations, they may have a mark on them, okay? So that's how, in child welfare talk, we have a 1-1A, which is primary caregiver has caused harm to a child. So that's for the kid who said, my mommy beat me, here's the mark. And if it's for the kid who says, I'm going to, that is a 1-1F, which is risk that child's likely to be harmed by their primary caregiver. 15 years of child welfare, you can rhyme this thing off very easily. That's what happens, okay? And then we look, say, here in our minimal care category, which really does not happen very often. We'd have, say, a 1-1K, which could be something like primary caregiver, so risk that child may be harmed by someone that is not a primary caregiver or a family member, and the parent has no knowledge of it. So it could be, say that, like, the 19-year-old counselor at the community center hit the kid. Well, they're not going to investigate the parent, and the parents remove their child from the program. Well, then there's no risk to the child. Did everybody on this side hear me? Good, good, okay. So this is what the eligibility spectrum looks like. This is what guides our work, okay? This is what's going to tell me you're picking up and you're going out today to do with this. This is the second half of it, where you can see this stuff has to do with adoption and foster care. So this is where I would have had questions. So are there questions about what we have talked about so far for this morning? Yes.
Just seeing the impact of what this has on families, I'm just alarmed. It looks like a series of letters and numbers, and this has profound impact for families.
Mm-hmm. It does. So that's the quick chart. The entire document has an explanation for every single number and letter section. But when you've been in child welfare for a very long time, you're able to just pick up the coding and go with it. So for any individual who works in, say, what we call the telephone intake department, they sit there with this document at their desk and they flip through it to see what does this match or what does this most commonly sound like. And that's how it then gets assigned a code. And long are the days for us where it's just one coding on a family. Because our culture and our society has changed so much over the last decade, 2 decades. There used to be where it was just one quote unquote simple coding. It was just one thing. But now you may have where there's a concern for, say, physical discipline, but then there's also a mental health component. Or there is intimate partner violence with a mental health component, or a mental health component with intimate partner violence. Or you have partner violence, and then you also have abandonment now because one parent's been arrested and one parent's been severely injured and they're now put in the hospital. So there's a lot of pieces that now come into play when you're working with a family, which makes child protection harder to work in. So when we hear about workers who are just trying to get through it and get to the next one, some workers it's because it's a paycheck. And for other workers it's because the caseload of what they're dealing with is so high and they have a certain amount of days to get certain things done. So I have 7 days from the time a file is assigned to me. But those 7 days include the weekend. But we don't work weekends. So I really got 5 days, right? And depending on the volume of your agency, it can make it really challenging to meet that 7-day standard, okay? And then let's throw in if there is holidays, if there is a long weekend, if you get it on day 3 of those 7 days and it's a Thursday. So there's a lot of complicating factors, which is not an excuse, but it's an explanation to why some of the things run the way they do. It's not as cut and dry as, it's Monday, it came in yesterday, here you go, you've got 7 days to go work on it. Well, you really only have 5, and if you haven't already pre-filled your schedule, or you don't have court that one of those days, your time really slips from you. Okay, I know I saw another hand go up somewhere. Yes, these two people here. So let's take the lady in the creamy brownie shirt and then the lady in front of her. She wanted to know if I've seen a generational impact because of being in the field for so long. So yes. And now that kinship, which is the department I work in, where we're trying to find family members to take care of children instead of sitting in care, it gets really complicated when you have great-grandma who had a file and may still have an open file, grandma has an open file, and now mom's at risk of losing her children. Where are you gonna put those kids? And depending on the way your area is, depending on the way your city is set up, if you have a particular part of the city, so like in Toronto, the downtown core has a lot of transiency, addiction issues, substance abuse, and mental health. So in the downtown office, they're dealing a lot with the intergenerational files, and those kids tend to end up a lot, like we do a lot more kinship assessments with that. No, sorry, we do less kinship assessments with those particular families because they don't have anybody to give to us. Because grandma, aunt, uncle, great-grandma, they all still have open files because they all still have someone under the age of 18. So that makes it really hard. But even if a family, so if, let's say grandma has a closed file, you can mitigate, her history can be mitigated. Talk to her about her history. What does life look like? How have things changed in your life? What strengths do you have now? What does your network look like now? Because as in doing an assessment of that grandmother, the society is looking at her to be a safe space to put that child, which means we're looking to make her a resource for that child. And we need to ensure it's a safe place for the child, because there's no sense of taking a child out of one place that someone has deemed unsafe to put them somewhere else that is not safe. It makes no sense. You might as well just have left them where they are. Therefore, they look at who's around, and they will, like some agencies have kin finders, they want to find somewhere to put these children. They don't want them in our care. Because the societies have recognized that the institutional way of raising children doesn't work either. So where's that happy middle? Where's the place where kids can be safe and children can be raised with their families and know who they are?
There were mitigating factors included in this initial coding.
Who else is involved with the family? So at the intake telephone screening level, you're going to be looking at, so who else is involved with the family? So is there a public health nurse? Is there a family home visitor? Are they connected to a community-based agency for some type of a service? Do the kids go to programming in the evenings? What else is in this family's community in terms of how they live their lives that can be seen as a strength or helpful? And then the workers will take that stuff into consideration to look at, okay then, so if this is the concern, but they're working with this, is this something that's already been addressed? Or is this something that can be addressed? And if it is, great, child welfare then is not needed if that safety risk can be addressed and mitigated and shut down. Yes?
One voice, one vision, one voice focus on like teachers, youth service workers, because we're here from the community and many agencies, but I find that teachers do a lot of referrals, and even black teachers easily recommend the kids to the CAS. They don't seem to understand. Youth service worker, I worked at the Roy McMurtry Youth Center, and a lot of those kids, they come in from the Children's Aid and they mitigate the bad behaviors. They don't help them at all, and whatever happens in custody, they also link it with the Children's Aid, which should not be done.
So the hope would be to be able to share this with inter-systems, which would be, say, like your school board and more of, say, the criminal justice side. But again, the project does end March 31st. And there kind of needs to be that invitation from the other systems to be able to share the knowledge.
Some work with teachers in schools. And if you look at the race equity practices, I want to say race equity 6, I think, is educating mandated referrers. So if whatever phase 3 of this project looks like, part of that thinking was that's where we would do that work. But we don't know, it's unlikely that we're gonna be here in this form. So really that's why we're having these sessions. We're kind of putting this onto the community to take up space in the school boards and in the schools and educate the teachers and draw attention to the fact that they are over-reporting black kids. You need to have those conversations, and we pay taxes, and at the end of the day, the teachers and the school board work for us, and we need to kind of flip the way we think about these systems. They work for us, and we have a right to be in those schools, sharing with them the knowledge that we're sharing with you, and making sure that they're doing right by our children. And
Have
then,
you spoken to the police? The police system?
no, we haven't had any real direct connection with the police. So Kika Ojo is our brilliant project manager for this project, and she does a lot of equity work. And in her equity work outside of OVOV, she does have those kind of inter-systems connections where she sits. She was on the committee that was looking at street checks.
Correct.
Carding, yeah, she was on that committee, and so she's out there doing that education and that work. But for this project, because we were I've been part of the team for just 18 months. And all this work that we've done, it's just been 18 months. So she was on her own before that for 2 years. And then the team came together, and for 18 months we've been doing this work, but a lot of it has been really focusing on trying to change the CASs, because that's where the work is happening. So we haven't really been able to make those inter-systems links, but the knowledge is here, and it doesn't need to stay here in this room. Every single person in this room should go out and book a meeting with your local police station or wherever it is. Take up space in the school boards and have these discussions with your school.
Yes, right in front.
Yeah, I hear you, and I think like this is a good platform for discussions like this. But I just think that, like, I realize that there are like many black people in the room, and this honestly, like, I feel that for change to be there, we have to bring other people. All these things that have been discussed here are things that we know, are the things that we have experienced, and it's very difficult, like, to face a system that is populated by people like 1 against 10. If I go back to my agency and I'm trying to advocate for black youth, it's not the same as someone who is from like a different culture coming with a different lens. Just like others say, when you're a black person, you are trying to advocate for yourself, you are seen as angry. But if it's somebody else who is doing the job, they are listened to because it's coming from somebody different.
Yeah, go ahead. I would say, I understand what you're saying, but I think that this is a crisis. And like Judy said, the black population is going to increase. And I mean, we've kind of done the work, and there are people who are doing the work and have taken it so far. But we can't let those kind of stereotypes or those fears of how we're going to be perceived stop us. If we need to be banging down doors, that's what we need to do. And then the other piece I'd say is that Judy's going to talk about it in some of the later slides, but our recommendation to the CASs is that each single Children's Aid Society in the province has a local advisory council. So that local advisory council would be made up of African Canadian community members, and they would hold the CASs accountable. So there are people that you would be able to tap. So Toronto CAS has one already, and they're not all called local advisory councils. They might be called, I don't know, something else. But you can call the CAS and say, I want to speak to your community or your black community, council or committee or whatever it is, and bring those issues to them so that they can kind of do that work too, and they're standing with you. Yes.
That was perfect. I was actually going to speak to that. I have a couple points, if I may.
Mm-hmm.
So addressing the stats that were presented with the black population in the city compared to those in care, I think there's a need to definitely create more of a balance, so reduce the amount of kids in care. But that was a perfect segue. I think it's important for CAS to consult with the black community to see what is it that you guys need or we need to address the issues that are being presented. Because there's been a historical conversation about black kids in care and not knowing how to address them or care for them. But I think it's important for us to say, this is what we need. because there are youth that need the services,
Oh, yes.
right? So, but there are issues from the services and the interaction between the community and the services. A next thing to speak to what you said is, I think there should be a collective front within each agency. So Peel Region, York, Toronto, Durham, speaking more to the GTA, where you can go to that group or that liaison community sector and say, hey, listen, we have your youth population in our foster home, in our group homes. How do we best serve them? So I think that's important. And the last point, I think, or two more points. There's a major lack of information amongst the population, information sharing and access to resources. So when they hear CAS or police services, automatically there's a wall, even mentally, in terms of how to engage with them. So they approach it with fear instead of approaching it collaboratively. So I think that plays a major factor.
Huge.
And to me, to answer a lot of the problems is not looking at the system to save it or to make the corrections. That stuff has to happen internally. So there should be some type of community forum or team or group that we build within ourselves. If we're going to wait on the system to do it, we're going to wait forever. Because this conversation has been happening for generations within our city. And when I say Toronto, I'm not talking about the fragment. The GTA is all Toronto. Brampton, whether you're in Rexdale, Scarborough, it's all Toronto. Because the kids move
Oh, yes.
within borders. So you got kids from Oshawa living in Brampton, Brampton kids living in Hamilton. So it's the same issues, and most likely come from the same cultural backgrounds. So a lot of the answers and issues have to come within and present it to the society as a way of to make the corrections.
Yes. I don't think CS should have a monitoring body. I think there should be one monitoring body that monitor all of them to ensure that communication, right? And that consistency going across, and that monitoring body should look similar like what the police have with outside forces that overlook when there's a shooting or something like that. The structure is there. I know there's issue with that structure, but every structure is there. You can learn from it and improve on it. So there's that. The other piece where we look at the aspect of, taking up the mantle, people in this room. Okay, I mean no disrespect in any particular way. People in this room are also burnt out. Okay, we're not addressing one of the key foundation of it is the intergenerational trauma of being Black in Canada and those pieces and how you're depleted on a day-to-day basis. You have your own family, plus you're in this era, right? So people are already doing triple time, right? I do think there was not a silence with the numbers that came out of it, but basically the community just kind of breathed and said, okay, finally the numbers are here to show you what we know and we're moving on, right? But also the communities, all of them is a community of oral history of elders. So those community individuals in our community with less resources are looking to us with the more resources and say, this has always been the traditional role that you guys go out and fix it for all of us, right? And I think we forget that traditional culture is dominant and it is happening. So we are the ones that they see with the knowledge. We're the ones that they see who have, the community has invested and you need to return it back. So they're looking for us to work behind the scenes or in front to deliver, right? And I think that's also a part of it that sometimes people look at it as it's complacent, but it's not. But it's traditional culture still operating in 20th century, right? And still have those responsibility of the people who come out of traditional culture to understand it and continue with the expectation of the culture, right? We train you, now go out and fix the problem.
In respectful ways. But what I was thinking about was listening to this, it really reinforces to me the power that individual workers have in like what happens with families and with kids. And other than these external kind of monitoring and accountability systems, which are so important, like what already exists internally to kind of monitor and supervise like the decisions that workers are making, like what already exists internally?
So every worker has a supervisor that they have to, that they're responsible to. That supervisor may or may not agree with what it is you're doing. that supervisor, if they have an understanding of their position of power and the lens in which they're looking things through, may have a push towards, we need to be doing better, okay? You then have some supervisors who don't have that lens. And then they may be the one who's telling the worker, no, we're not gonna do that, we're gonna do this. But that doesn't better service the family. But this is what we're going to do, right? And then you have family case conferences where you have a worker who wants to be able to say more, but can't because they have their supervisor who doesn't think things should be going in that direction. And so that worker can't say some of the things they would like to. And this is why if an African Canadian family has someone that's with them that's from a community-based agency, that person from the community-based agency can be asking certain questions that worker may not be able to share that information on, and may be able to hold accountable in terms of, say, using the 11 race equity practices, may be able to hold accountable in referencing back to the tools, what were ratings of the tools, or the Child, Family, and Youth Services Act. So those are the pieces. If it's a complaint process, you start with the worker, you move to the supervisor, you move to, say, a director of service, or if they have an anti-oppressive lead at that agency, or a director of diversity and inclusion, or say anti-oppression, you could start with that person. And I'm gonna hope that change is then made. There also is the CFSRB, which is the Child Family Services Review Board. And there was PACE, which was the Provincial Advocate's Office, until it was cut by Doug Ford and his government, the government. So that then presents a challenge, because where do some of the complaints go? Keeping in mind that those two complaint bodies, so when PACE was here and the CFSRB, there's not an anti-Black racist lens in looking at the concern or the complaint through those two processes.